I'd like to begin by introducing myself. My name is Matthew Holewinski. I'm a technical consultant here with AutoDesSys. And our presentation today is rendering with RenderZone. RenderZone is a plugin for both formZ and bonZi 3D. Offers both photorealistic and sketch rendering styles, and also includes global illumination to globally illuminate your scene. And we'll cover all that stuff in just a few moments. What is global illumination? Well, global illumination lets you take your shaded work display mode, which is your normal working interactive mode. Here's where you create and modify geometry, and it looks pretty good. But when you use RenderZone, you can use global illumination to set up the lighting so that light bounces around in your scene, that subtracts light from corners, and then you can RenderZone render that with those lighting conditions with the global illumination to give you a higher quality image. Now, the RenderZone plugin can render anywhere in between from abstract to very photorealistic rendering. For example, here on the left, using the sketch rendering part of the RenderZone plugin, you can do sketch renderings that look like oil painting or stipple patterns. Maybe it looks like an artistic pencil effect, and that's how you can present it to your client. Now, on the other side, you can still use the full quality of the global illumination lighting and still use the sketch renderer with that, so you can get realistic lighting but with a sketch rendering effect. And I should mention that I'll be covering both things that are with and without the RenderZone plugin, because there's a lot of stuff you can do in bonZi 3D or formZ that allows you to do a lot of texturing and lighting, but the RenderZone lets you take that texturing and lighting even further to give it more realistic quality. So I'll try to clarify the difference between what's normal in bonZi 3D and formZ and what is in the RenderZone plugin. Now, without the RenderZone plugin, you still get hundreds of materials, live interactive texture mapping. You can drag and drop those on your objects. I'll show you how that works in just a moment. And with the RenderZone plugin, if you're using that, then you get more materials and more parameters. And so you get things like mirror type reflections, bump shader effects, accurate glass properties, and metal accurate properties, and things like that. Things that can't be achieved with just an interactive shaded work type of environment. Now, RenderZone also offers a decal tool that's actually part of the RenderZone plugin, and it actually lets you apply multiple materials onto the same surface, and we'll take a look at that today also. Now, without the RenderZone plugin, there's still plenty of light types you can add to your scene. There's ambient light, there's distant sunlights, point and cone lights, and there's a database. You can choose any city, any part of the world, and it'll accurately position sunlight for you, and there's some simple parameters that can be assigned to those light sources. Now, if you are using the RenderZone plugin, then you get more light types and more parameters. So you get things like projector lights, and you can convert geometry into lights with an area light, and the list goes on. And we'll actually cover those briefly in our presentation today. And there's also more accurate parameters. So you can still use the simple parameters, but you can also go in and assign accurate values to those light sources, such as input power or output efficiency, photometric lighting conditions, and things like that. Now, without the RenderZone plugin, you still get the Match View tool that's in bonZi and formZ. You can match your model to a background image. And if you have the RenderZone plugin, then you can take this one step further. You can actually do a RenderZone rendering and have the shadows and reflections of your object show up and be ray traced into that background photograph. And to get help for any of this RenderZone plugin stuff, you can just simply right-click any of those RenderZone tools or any of the rendering features, and you can choose the manual option, and all of our documentation is online. So all the information for the RenderZone plugin is all accessible right there just by right-clicking any tool. Now, our goal today is to take this very simple, quick, conceptualized, contemporary residence that we have here, and in just a few easy steps, give it something more of a higher quality, something like what we have here. Now, sometimes, like I said, when you're using RenderZone, you don't want a photorealistic or high-quality rendering. You want something a little more abstract, so you can still use the RenderZone and global illumination stuff to render your scene, but maybe without the color, just use the bump shader effects. You can render with lines for these objects, and you can still use, like the ambient occlusion effect for the lighting and things like that. Or you can actually use the sketch renderer to actually use a sketch rendering mode, like stipple rendering or oil painting or things like that. So with that, let's take a look at our model and see what it takes to get to this point right here using formZ and bonZi 3D using the RenderZone plugin. So we're going to use formZ here. And the first thing we're going to do is look at how we can create some materials and apply them to our object. So we look at the materials palette over here. Let me double click on that material, and it brings up the material parameters. And of course, the first thing I want to look at here on the right hand side, upper right hand corner, is the material type. It can be either shaded or render zone. If it's in the shaded mode, then it's more of a simpler type of material that uses just a couple color parameters. You can set a few reflection parameters, set some transparency effects. Okay, now this is what you get without the RenderZone plugin, and you can still apply texture if you want. Now, if you switch to the RenderZone material type, then you get more shader effects and more parameters. So, for example, you look at the color list, and now there's a long list of them. So we can do things like maybe if we want to create an actual roof, we can go in and we can choose the roof tiles option, and you can see here I can actually go in and create my own type of roof. I can change the colors. Maybe give it a brown color, change all these different parameters that you can see, maybe make it a Spanish type tile, and you can see with these extended textures you're able to create your own textures. And so you can use image maps if you want, or use these procedural to create an infinite array of different types of texture effects. All right. Some other things that we can add to the materials using the RenderZone plugin would be, if you look at the reflection parameters here, you can see that we have things like metal accurate, so it can accurately recreate metal type surfaces. So if we choose gold, you can see the refraction and absorption indexes are already set up for you, and there's reflectivity in the surface, and all these high level rendering effects can be assigned for you. And transparencies, instead of a simple type of transparency, there's a longer list of things we can choose, such as maybe choosing a mist pattern. So you can see here we can create sort of a misty effect for the transparency, and we'll actually show you some uses of how we can use that in just a little bit here. And there's even a bump shader effect, so we can take a perfectly smooth surface and have it render us some sort of a bumpy surface. So if we choose grid, you can see that we can apply a grid to our object, and by modifying the different parameters here for maybe the amplitude, we can have those grids go in or out, give it any size that we want. And so if you want to create cracks in the sidewalk, or maybe in tile you want to create the grout lines or brick lines, you can actually render higher level effects using these additional shader effects here. Maybe you want to create skin or leather. There's a cells option here. Adjust those parameters to, so you don't have to model this type of complex geometry. You can have a flat surface and have it render so it looks like some kind of 3D bumpy texture. So now that we can see that we have more parameters that we can choose from, let's look at some other ways that we can create our materials in bonZi 3D or in formZ. There's some predefined libraries that we have here. And if I were to go down, they're organized in different categories here. So if we went to maybe the laminate option, just go through, and there's landscape, water, dirt, gravel, roads, whatever you want. And so we can just go through these lists here. Now also notice that when you go through some of these categories, some of these have a RenderZone icon. So if there's a RenderZone icon, those are additional materials added to all of the materials. So if you don't have the RenderZone plugin, then you'll have a lot of materials there that you can use, but if you add the RenderZone plugin, then you get many more, and you can see that the ones with a little icon are in addition to the other ones. Like I said before, there's a lot of parameters that we can adjust for this. For example, if I want to create a perforated plate and drop that, just drag and drop it onto my material, now all my parameters are set for me. And you can see I can actually go in and tweak those parameters. So I can adjust the radius of the holes and the transition between the holes, and change these parameters around to sort of have an infinite array of different types of patterns that we can adjust for creating our materials. All right, so let's find one that we're going to use in our project here. Let's go to the stone category, and we'll choose the stone material right here, drag and drop it onto our material. Now you can't change the original materials that are here. Those are permanently locked, and so if you want to use those, drag and drop it onto your material. Now your material takes on all those parameters, and we can adjust those here now if we want. We can go in and adjust any of those values. That's how we can change it. Now to apply it to the object, just simply drag and drop it right onto the object here. And there it is. Let's apply it to that object. Now, I have a few other materials that I've already created. And so these came from the predefined libraries. We have a stucco pattern. If I zoom in over here, I can just drag and drop that onto the walls. See, we get the little stucco that has a little 3D bump on there. All right. And if you don't find one in the materials that you need, you can load your own image map. So you can see if I were to double click that material, the color map option, I can actually go in and load any pixel image. So any PIC, TIFF, Targa, we support all the industry standards. Surf the internet, find something, copy it down, and there you get your own texture created. And then once that image is loaded, we can then now drag and drop that onto our objects, and that becomes the actual surface style texture for that object. Okay. let's create the roof. We have these slabs for the roof, and I'm going to apply this brown material to that. I have lots of objects that I want to apply that to, so then I switch over to the paint tool, which is over here. And with the paint tool and whatever material is active, I can quickly paint multiple objects instead of having to drag and drop onto each one of those one by one. Now you can also assign a material to one face of the object. So hold on the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows. So I can take this other roofing material that I created here, and actually that's from the predefined libraries, and I'm going to hold down the Command key and drag and drop it just onto the top face. So now you can see that that object, the whole object's brown, but the top face now takes this other material color on top of that. All right. Now to assign that to multiple faces, we can use the paint tool for that also. Hold down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows, whatever the active material is. I can just click, 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 and quickly add that to other faces, either on other objects or on the same object. Okay, now at this point, instead of having the red cedar for the whole garage object that we have here, I'm going to go back and change that. Let's make this a stucco pattern, and then I'm going to take the wood planks and just drop that onto the front face only. Hold the Command key down, now it's just on the front face. The next thing that we need to look at is, now that we have all of our materials assigned, how do we control the size and orientation of the textures on the object? Well, if we were to spin this around, we can use the Edit Texture tool. So now if I click on any face of the object, you can see I get this little widget. I can modify the width, I can modify the height, I can modify by the center arrow here the width and the height, so you can see it locks sort of the height to width ratio to the same value. I can rotate it, so maybe the image or the texture or whatever the material is can be positioned anywhere that you want on that object. Grab the little dot and we can actually slide that along. All right, now notice that as I change this graphically here in the modeling window to eyeball it, I also have numeric information in the tool option. So as I'm changing these parameters dynamically, I can always read the numeric information or type in numbers at any time. Now let's look down here. Now this is a very interesting part here. This garage, this is just sort of a conceptualization of a residence, just some massing models here. This is just the garage is sort of conceptualized as just a box with a little recessed area for the garage. I'll add more detail later as the design changes. Right now I just want to sort of visualize it. So I just have a recessed area. I painted the face. Now watch this. As I edit the texture of the garage, maybe I want to make those wood planks, the red cedar, maybe I want smaller panels or larger panels. And as I change the size, notice that it's changing the size of all the faces of the object. So even my stucco pattern that's on that wall is getting larger and getting smaller. And it's like, well, all I want to do is change just to one face, not the size of all the faces of the object. And that's where the Map Texture tool comes in. So what I can do when you create an object, it's sort of created as one group of texture mapping properties for all the surfaces on that object. So with the Map Texture tool, I can hold down the Command key, click on just one face, so it retexture maps just the one face. So now that can be mapped independently from all the other faces of the object. So now when I use the Edit Texture tool on that face, you can see now as I change the size of that material on just that face, it's not affecting any other face of the object. And that was achieved using the Map Texture tool and just clicking on one face, which was done by holding down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows. All right, so now that we got all our materials set up the way we want, everything's looking pretty good. I should mention at this point that everything I've done up to this point was done without RenderZone. So you're saying, wow, that's a lot of stuff we can do. We can create all these materials, we can apply them, texture map them, we're all set. So let's see what we get in addition if we add the RenderZone plugin. Well, one of the tools that we get with the RenderZone plugin is the decal tool, which actually lets us apply multiple materials onto the same surface. So here I can only have one material on each face. So now if I were to, in formZ 7, I have different workspaces here. I can go to the rendering and animation workspace to get just the rendering and animation tools, and inside of that tool palette is a decal tool, and allows me to apply decals or other materials onto the surfaces of the object. So what I'm going to do is take this nice white pristine stucco pattern, and I want to sort of create a little diffuse variation, maybe some little dark spots on there, make it look a little bit weathered to give it more of a realistic look. So to do that, what I'm going to do is create another material, and I'm going to use the transparency mist, and you can see here I can go in and create some kind of a transparent pattern here. All right, give it maybe a gray color. And then what I'm going to do is select the decal tool. I'll click on my object, You can see it brings that whole object in. And then I can actually create the plus button to create a brand new decal and then apply it infinitely all over the whole object. And I've already created that here to speed things up. So if I turn that on and do a RenderZone rendering, you can see that we're getting sort of this, not a pristine white material, we're getting this gray mist that's on top of that. Okay. There's another material that I created. I just loaded the Bonsai 3D image, or you can load the formZ image, and you can see I can actually place that on the object. So we could go in and position it instead of infinitely on the object. I'm just going to place it one time, and you can see, get this little marquee of where it's placed on the object. This could be a logo, maybe a company sign, some lettering, whatever. You can see that's actually placed on top of there. So now we can keep layering multiple materials onto the same face of that object, either on one face or all the faces. So we can add maybe some weeds at the bottom, some streaks up on top to sort of weather it, things like that. And that's how the decal tool works. All right. Now, the next thing that I would like to do is look at the different display modes. Now, some of these display modes are available without the RenderZone plugin, and some of them are available with the RenderZone plugin. So let's go ahead and take a look at which ones are which. The first thing I'd like to do is look at all the display modes that are up on top over here. And you can see up in the top right-hand corner there, the first one is the wireframe mode. If I click on that, of course, we see our geometry as just a bunch of wires. If I then click on the hidden line, which is this icon right there, we get a hidden line of our scene. And to change the parameters of that, I can open up the display options palette. I always hit the F9 key for that, but here you can see in the display pull down, you can just choose it right here. And this is a palette that you can keep open. It's a floating palette. So as I'm going through my different display modes, I can change any of the parameters for that particular display mode. So for example here, maybe I want the silhouette edges to be a bit darker. And also notice I can't see any of the inside of the building. So the glass that I have in there, it treats it as a solid object. So I can't see through that solid object in the hidden line rendering. If I want to see inside, I can make the transparent objects to show up as wires. And then I just change anything I want. And I click the update button. And now you see we get darker silhouette edges. And now we can actually see the hidden line information inside because any transparent objects are assigned as wires. And you can adjust that to get just the exact type of hidden line rendering that you want. Okay. Now another option we can choose is the doodle sketch. I click on this one here. If I click on render, then of course it gives it more of a hand sketch effect. There's a bunch of predefined doodle styles that are already set up for you. You can create your own. I'll show you how easy it is to do that. Just click on the new button right here. It creates a brand new one. Let's click the update to see the progress of that. And you can see here, right now there's no effects added to this, so it looks just like a hidden line rendering, which is what it actually starts with. And you can see there's a whole long list of effects that we can add to it. I can scroll up and on that list. If I see one that I want to add, I can click on that, like maybe extend, and add it. And these are the effects that are being added to my current scene. So now for each effect, there's a set of parameters down here, and I can adjust those parameters. For example, the extend, I can increase or decrease how far those lines extend on the edges of these objects and adjust it that way to get your own little custom feel for that type of doodle sketch effect. Maybe put a break in the effects library, add that to the list. Once again, just tweak our parameters for that. So we can adjust the parameters for extend, adjust the parameters for the break, and just keep tweaking those until you get the desired look and feel that you want. If you want to get rid of that break, we can then get that out of the list. Okay, and that's the other vector-based display mode. Next, I'd like to look at shaded work. And when we're shaded work, this is the default mode. This is when you're working on your model. You can actually see it's fully lit. So as you spin around your model, inside the building, outside, everything's fully lit. So it doesn't use any light sources. It uses just some kind of internal lighting system that just makes sure that everything's lit for you. All right. Now, if you go to shaded full, then you can see this does use the actual lighting. So now based on the lights that we have set up in our scene, we're going to get shadows and we'll get dark areas if there's no light in those areas. So we can get sort of a preview of what that lighting conditions will be in that scene. All right. So just to sort of show you that, now there's a bunch of parameters we can change for that. We can turn shadows on and off and the silhouette edges and all that stuff, but let's go ahead and turn that off for just a moment here. And let's just maybe look at the actual lighting as we're in the shaded work mode to view how the lighting is going to react. Look at our lights palette. How about right here? There it is. And we can see that any project that you start, there's an ambient and a sunlight that's automatically in that project. To make it visible, click on the little eye there to make it visible. And if I were to move that, you can see that as we move it around, we're getting real-time shadows. Okay, adjust it over here maybe. All right. Now, if you want to position that light accurately, there's a sun position palette. So we go to sun position, and you can see here we can change the time of day. So I just slide that slider back and forth. I can choose any day, any part of the world. I can choose any city, like maybe we want this to be New York City at a certain time. We can set it to the current time now. It's automatically animated for you. So if you were to play that, you can see that I didn't have to go and set in the animation parameters. It's automatically animated for you. And so you can adjust all these parameters. And if you want to export that out, there's an export button. And this automatically creates a movie for you. So that's one way of working with that. Now at this point, we have all our textures. We got the lighting set up the way we want. And at this point, all that lighting stuff that we've just did, you don't need RenderZone for that. And so why would you want RenderZone? Well, now we can make it look a higher quality rendering here. You can use the RenderZone plugin to then actually render the scene. So by clicking the RenderZone button, you can see it'll then go through and render it. Now we need to adjust a few things here. It's still pretty flat, and we're going to look at the exact steps that you need to sort of spice this up and take it up to the next level. First thing we're going to do is get more light in here. It's sort of dark. We have the ambient light, which is shining around. We have a distant light that's coming in, but we need to get more light in the scene. And here's a real quick, easy way of doing that. What we'll do is go to our lights palette. These are the two default lights that come with our scene. The ambient just sort of shines everywhere. The sunlight is a directional light, which is shown right here. So it's coming from one direction only. Now what I'm going to do is add another light source. Click the little plus button here, and I'm going to give this a name. Just so that I can recognize this one. Atmospheric light. There we go. So there's a new light in there. So if I double click and change the parameters, I'm going to make the intensity, I'm going to turn it down to almost 0. Just make it like 1%. Now this is a sunlight, this is a distant light, but I'm going to turn the intensity or the brightness all the way down. So there's no light coming from that. Because what I'm going to do is go into the parameters here and turn on the atmospheric light option and leave that at 100%. So now, by turning that option on, instead of a light coming from a single direction, light's going to be coming from everywhere in your scene. It's like a dome that's placed around your scene, and your light source is now radiating from everywhere along that dome, so that the back side, the front side, all your whole scene is going to get light coming in from this atmospheric light condition. Now I'm also going to take the shadow option and turn that off. So now light will actually penetrate through objects, so it can fully light not only the exterior but also the interior of your scene by having a shadow option off, because it's sort of like this magical option here where light can actually pass through walls if the shadow option is turned off. So that's a real quick way to add and just flood a bunch of light into the scene. Now, there's a great companion that goes with atmospheric lights. If we open up our display options, we click on the RenderZone option here, we're going to go into the global illumination tab. Here's where we're going to start talking about global illumination. There's only two settings. We turn on the final gather. What the final gather does is it bounces light in the scene. So when we create an atmospheric light, it's coming from all different directions, and we turn final gather on, that's going to bounce it. So now this would be a great way to globally illuminate light, as it's coming in from every direction and bouncing around in your scene. So let's try this. Let's click the update button, let the thing render, and that's how it was the previous one. It'll take an extra second or two to calculate the position of the bouncing light in the scene. So, add a few seconds to the actual rendering, but now you'll see that we do a lot better job of getting that light distributed throughout your scene. It's a lot brighter. We're also getting some color bleeding. I'm not sure if you see this or not, but as the light is bouncing off this green roofing material, we're actually picking up the shades of green along there. Okay, and we're getting light shining everywhere. Now we're still missing one component though. It's still sort of flat. We're not getting any contrast in the corners where these two surfaces meet. And to darken those areas, what we're going to do is add some ambient occlusion, which is the other global illumination option. So all we do is we turn that on, and it'll darken all these little corners or edges wherever two surfaces meet. Now there are a couple settings we might want to look at here. We can look at the overall scene size and give it some approximation of what to look at here. So if I just say, well, it's a room, it's a building, it's a city, just by setting one of those options, it's going to sort of preset our default values for us. Now if you do want to adjust that, let me just mention a few things really quick to help you out so you can try this on your own. The quality, I always leave that very low, and it usually looks pretty good. Some of the final renderings, I keep that low, and then if you want to, for the final rendering, you can always crank that quality up a little higher to get a better ambient occlusion effect. The other important aspect is this distance. The distance can be small, medium, or large, and all this is telling us is how close do two surfaces have to be to each other to subtract light. If there's two boxes there, and to get light subtracted from where those two boxes, the gap that's between those boxes, this is the minimum distance that those two boxes have to be within to start subtracting that light. So you can set it to one of these preset small, medium, or large values, or set it to a custom value. So I can say 3 feet. Now you can see if any two surfaces are within 3 feet of each other, it'll subtract light in those areas. And I'm going to crank up this additional contrast to really darken those areas up, to exaggerate it just so that you can see it. And this is something usually around 50% or less might work pretty well. But in this case, I'm going to crank it up maybe a little bit higher to sort of exaggerate that, to make it a bit more visual so we can see it. Click on the update button, let the thing render, and now you can see we're using the final gather. So it's going to calculate the bouncing light. We're getting color bleeding from the bouncing light. Then the ambient occlusion, we're darkening wherever the two surfaces meet. So see how it's getting dark in this area. It's getting dark like next to the chimney and between the ground and so on and so forth. And I think you get the effect of how that works. Now there's just a couple more parameters I want to show to sort of spice up your RenderZone rendering. Look at the scene tab. I click on that. What you can do is take the background. You can load any type of an image. That's what we did in this scene here. So we loaded a background image. You can go to options and load a background photograph. We don't see it here until we actually render the scene. Now if you want to see it in the interactive modes, like go to shaded work, you can actually load that same image there too. So I go to flat image, and I can actually load that image here also to sort of get a preview of what that's going to look like before I RenderZone render it. So let's go back to RenderZone. The other thing I want to do too is I want to look at this environment option, which is normally off. And what this does is it allows you to load some images that will artificially reflect onto reflective surfaces. And so we can turn this on. We can go to the options for this and load some pixel images. This could be a picture of the building across the street, and now these images will actually reflect on reflective objects. So the perfect example in this scene would be the glass for the actual building. You can see in our scene we have nothing across the street. We won't get a whole lot of reflection on the surfaces of that glass, but by turning this option on and loading these images, we'll actually see these images reflecting on the glass. So it looks like there's a building across the street on the other side. And the other thing we can do, of course, is add some entourage. So, of course, we have all sorts of components that you can add to your scene, some trees if we want. And you can see that there's a place component tool that we can add some people, maybe some trees, some furniture, whatever we want. So just to sort of quickly show you that, I can go through our library, maybe place a scene. Now, some of these trees are 2D, so you can see here that I can actually align it with a view. So if I were to place one of those trees and spin the view, you can see that it always changes, so that no matter as I change my view parameters, that tree will always be looking at the current camera angle. All right, and that's pretty much it. I click the RenderZone button one more time, and that's how we end up with our final rendering that looks like this. Now, just to recap one more time, the two important parts of global illumination is ambient occlusion. With it turned on, I turn the color of the textures off here. I'm using just the bump effect here, and you can see we're getting some dark corners there. If the ambient occlusion's off, there's no subtraction of the ambient light from those corners, and so it's a little more flat. The other component to global illumination was the final gather. With it on, you just get a brighter scene because light is bouncing around, whereas if it's off, the scene won't be as bright because light comes, hits a surface, and just stops. All right. Now, the other advantage of using the RenderZone plugin in Bonsai 3D or formZ is, of course, as you start to make design changes, change some of the textures, you change your geometry, you just click the RenderZone button, you re-render it, you have another version of your design. You don't have to export geometry, and every time you make a change, you got to go through that pipeline again. So it's really nice to have that RenderZone plugin integrated into your workflow. I want to mention real quick about the sketch rendering mode. That's the last one that we didn't look at yet. We looked at all these display modes except for sketch render, and you can see here if I were to click on the sketch render option, how that works is I can go in, choose the type of sketch rendering that I want. It could be stipple, oil painting, lines and strokes, or pencil effects, whatever I want. There's all sorts of parameters that we can set for that, and then we click the render button, and then we get that type of penciled effect or stipple effect. Now, there's just a few more things I want to talk about to wrap things up today. I just want to briefly talk about maybe some other projects to sort of highlight some other aspects that we can look at. For example, here's just another project. We would know how to do a daytime render. You just add a sunlight, the ambient light, an atmospheric light, do some global illumination on it, and we're done. We load a pixel image in the background. So this is no different than the project we have here. Now, what if you want to do a night scene? Well, you don't have to change much. There's just a few things that can be changed. We still have a sunlight, but the sunlight, we actually changed the color of the sun to be a dark blue. This is sort of like a Hollywood trick where, their night scenes are always fully lit with, blue lights. And so you can actually go in and still cast shadows, have light bouncing around in the scene, and the ambient occlusion works, and all that stuff works, except now we're just using a colored light, so to sort of bring out or enhance the geometry detail that is in your scene. Now, the other thing that we need to do is, how about glow? We need windows to look like lights coming out of those windows, maybe some glowing for any of the other light fixtures that are there. And there's actually a few different ways that this can be achieved in Bonsai or formZ using the RenderZone plugin. So let's briefly take a look at a few of those options here. Now, these lights here, it's just the glow option for the material that is turned on. So just to sort of quickly show you how that works, we can actually take any material. I don't know, here's our curtains, okay? If I were to double click on that, you can see that one of the reflection options, if I click on the options for that, is the glow parameter. And if I crank that up, the material just glows. So you crank it up that high, it just brightens up that material so it looks like it's actually glowing. So that's one way of doing that. You can also create glow by using another type of a material. So let's say we have a light fixture and we want these lights to actually glow. What we can do is create a material that is just a plain color white. It's a constant reflection, so it doesn't vary within the lighting of the scene, but the transparency is going to be neon. So we sort of create a neon glow for that material. And so what I do is I actually create a series of spheres. Let me turn the layer on that has those on. I apply this neon material to it, which actually is less transparent in the center and more transparent on the outside, which gives the illusion of a neon glow. Okay? And by doing that, I render the scene, and now you can see that we get the glow effect not from an actual light source glowing, but from the physical geometry that we create. Thus, we have the capabilities of controlling the shape and size of any type of glow pattern by just assigning the glow material to that. Okay? Now, there are actual glow that you can add to the light source itself. These are all material glows in which we're actually using materials to simulate glow. We can also add that to the actual light source. For example, here we have some cone lights, render the scene, and you can see that the light source is actually glowing. Now, how do we turn that on in our light sources? Well, if you look at our lights over here, let me double click on one of those. If you look at the parameters for that light, you can see that there's a glow option which is normally off. You turn it on, look at the glow options, and there's really two different types of glow. One is simple, it's quick, it renders fast. There's just an intensity slider, you drag it back and forth for how much you want that light to actually glow. And that's how we end up with the type of glow that we have here. Now let's look at the other type of glow. There's also the accurate glow. So if I go into the parameters and look at the accurate parameters, this is a lot more complex. This allows you to create realistic volumetric glow, which actually will have light splitting through object. You can put a little noise, which is like smoke or haze within the volumetric glow effect. It is a little more processor intensive. It's going to take a lot more calculation to do these type of things. But just to give you some idea of what we can do with that, if you look at an image like this, here's using an accurate glow where we got the volumetric type conditions where you can see as the light's coming through, it's actually splitting and it's truly calculating the glow as it comes through the mullions, whereas that simple glow doesn't do that. The last thing I want to talk about is just quickly go through the different types of light types to make sure that we're fully aware of what we can do with the different light sources inside of Bonsai 3D or formZ using the RenderZone plugin. So let's quickly look at that. Let's go to our rendering and animation workspace for just a second. And something that's neat in formZ now is we have the capability of adding lights as an actual tool palette, whereas in previous versions you had the options of adding lights here. You just click the plus button, you can add as many lights as you want. Now here we can just sort of place them in the scene anywhere. We also have dynamic controls for these lights. So if you want to control the position of light, the fall off for a cone light, here's the outer fall off range, here's the inner fall off range for the hotspot of that light source. We have a projector light, which is like a gel light. You can load any pixel image that you want, projected in the scene. Custom lights can be created, and if I look at the parameters for that, you can see that I can actually go in and control the distribution of how light radiates from that fixture. And how these are used the majority of the times is you don't want to adjust those curves yourself. You can if you want. What you want to do is you want to load industry standard IES, CIBSE, or CIE lighting data files from the manufacturer. You go to the website, you get these lighting data files, you just load it, and that light will radiate exactly the way it does from the actual lab data. And all the lighting manufacturers have all those files for you. You don't have to create those yourself. You can also take any object and make it a light source. If you want to make neon signs, you can just create an object, use the area light to click on it. Now light will radiate off the surfaces of that object. You can just draw a simple line. So let's just draw a vector line, could be a curve line, whatever you want. Click the line light tool, click on it, and light will radiate from that line. Of course, we have other options here to control the fall off range. I can reduce the radius and control how light is coming off of that fixture too. So that's a brief introduction to how the lights are positioned and how you can dynamically move them and adjust the parameters here in the scene. And what I'd like to do is conclude by just going through a few sample images of how these different light sources could have been used. Now, I was searching our gallery. I saw a bunch of nice images. I don't know how the user did it, but I saw certain images that lend themselves well for certain light types. So I have a little collage here to highlight that. For example, we have this beautiful interior scene, and all we really need is some sunlight and the ambient light, which is our default light sources, because the final gather is going to be bouncing light. The ambient light's going to be getting in everywhere. Our atmospheric light, if we add that without shadows, that's going to be penetrating through the roof and be able to come in and bounce around to fully light that scene. A cone light would be perfect right here, so we can put those into the recessed lighting here because it's sort of like a spotlight or sort of like a flashlight, so shining down. Point lights radiate everywhere in 3D space, so that would be a great place to put it on the wall over here. Line lights, this scene could have been done by just drawing a line in the little cavity here, maybe drawing a line back there, convert it to a line light, we're done. Here's where we can go to the website and you can actually download these files. So if you want to create a custom light, just download the file, load it, place that light in the scene, and it's going to radiate based on that actual lab data. There's environment lights, so you can actually fully light your scene using a HDRI image. And so this is a great way to recreate certain types of environments. They have a camera which records not only the RGB color data, but also the light intensity values. So these images have color data and light data for each pixel. So as you map those around your scene, it automatically does it for you, but you just load the image and that just automatically creates the lighting in your scene based on these images. There's a bunch of free images that are out there on the web, and you can download those and use those as actual light sources. There's the projector light, so of course you load any pixel image and put the glow option for that. And there's also the area light. The area light, there's so many different ways to use that. You can just create a 2D flat rectangle, convert that to an area light, and light will radiate off the surface of that rectangle, and that's how you can sort of flood a bunch of light into the scene. Or you can get sort of creative with it, create a complex NURBS object, convert that to an area light. And also the light that comes off that surface is the color of the object too. Now there's different parameters you can change it, so it can be a different color light if you want, or you can use a surface material color, whatever. There's all sorts of parameters to play with to control how light is coming off of a surface for an area light. Hopefully this is a good introduction into the RenderZone plugin. There's a lot of stuff you can do in formZ and Bonsai 3D without the RenderZone plugin, as for adding some lights and some textures, shadow effects, and the sun positioning. But the RenderZone just takes it to the next level. It gives you global illumination renderings, the sketch rendering modes, and just so many more different light types that we can use to further articulate your scene. And this concludes the Rendering with RenderZone presentation.